It is such an honor to be here, and I start by thanking all of you for your service. And I know there are so many in here who have served and continue to serve this great nation, and I'm very proud of all of you. I want to start by congratulating my colleagues that you are recognizing today with your awards. I particularly want to thank my colleagues in the Senate who really have worked with me shoulder to shoulder in addressing this issue. Senator Klobuchar, another former local prosecutor, Senator Gillibrand, Senator Shaheen, all of us have worked together to try to address what we see are major shortcomings in the way the military has looked upon and treated sexual assault in the ranks. As you know, we are making some significant progress. If somebody would have told me, frankly, I'll confess to you, and some of you who attend armed services hearings, this is certainly not the first time I have grilled the military on subjects since I became a member of the committee. I will say it is the first time I have grilled the military and had results happen as quickly as they have in this instance. And it really was only about a month from the time that exchange occurred with General Mattis that the Joint Chiefs recommended to the Secretary of Defense that Article 60 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice be changed and remove the ability of the convening authority to overturn a jury verdict. Congratulations to all of you. We now will be looking at a defense authorization bill this year that will clearly codify what Secretary Hagel has announced in terms of the military support for this change. And obviously, we have an awful lot of other work to do. Now you all have a small bit of real progress to show that you coming forward with your horrific and tragic experiences have and will continue to force change. What has happened so far marks some headway, but so much more obviously must be done. We have to have a shot at regaining the trust of many of you who've watched your perpetrator prevail while your military career went up in smoke. Seeing these changes through is one of my top priorities, and this is why. Everyone's work is colored by their experiences. In the 70s, I was a 25-year-old assistant prosecutor in Kansas City. I found myself assigned to many of our sexual assault cases, partly because I was the only woman assistant DA in the office. There was a pervasive blame the victim mentality that prevailed back then, somewhat like some of the mentality that many of you faced as you confronted the crime that had been committed against you. I will tell you a couple of true stories from my days as a young prosecuting attorney. I will never forget sitting around a conference table with the entire table was full with senior prosecutors in my office. I was obviously the only woman in the room. They were discussing the docket and what cases would move to trial, what cases would try to plea, and what cases would be dismissed. Imagine my surprise when the man in charge of the criminal docket, one of the top leaders of the office, looked around the table, had a file in front of him, and he said, "You know, I think we gotta let this one go." And my ears perked up. We were going to dismiss a rape case. I wanted to know why. And he said, "You know, I've looked at this file, and the victim had an IUD in it." Well, I sat there for a minute. I thought, well, are they going to laugh? Is this a joke? It wasn't. And so, in a very soft voice, and probably with shaking, I would imagine, I said, I want everyone at this table to know that I want to make sure I understand. Now, if I get raped tonight, will you take the case because I'm on the birth control pill? Well, that was an awkward moment for the men in the room. They all looked around or stared at their navel and realized that maybe they weren't thinking about this in the right context. At that point in our criminal justice system in the civilian world, there was way too much discussion about the conduct of the victim. Is the woman promiscuous? Has she had sex with other men? I knew I needed to take on some tough cases in order to prove to my colleagues that some of their considerations were not only inappropriate, they were just offensive. So one of my prove to my colleagues cases that I insisted upon taking, even though they didn't even want to file the case, was the case of a stripper who had gone home to party with 4 men. So she was a stripper, she left with 4 men she didn't know, went to a house that she didn't know to party, and they proceeded to rape her for several hours on end, taking turns. At one point in time, she made the excuse that she wanted to clean up, went naked to the 2nd floor of the house, and threw herself out of the 2nd floor window naked, running down the street screaming for help. I insisted that we take that case. My colleagues laughed at me. I will never forget during the trial when the leader of this group was on trial and I was standing in the hallway. He walked out of the courtroom with his lawyer, and with his lawyer out of earshot, he looked at me and he says, "You know you want it too." We convicted him the next day. The hand of hundreds of survivors just like that woman and just like all of you. We cried together often. Their raw sadness drives my passion on this subject. It's because of them and you that we will not stop until we fix all of the problems associated with military sexual assault. How they handle the crime and how they handle the victims. In the civilian court system, sexual assault no longer focuses on the conduct of the rape survivor, the circumstances of their personal life, what she wore, what she'd been drinking. Cases now rest just on the conduct of the defendant. And that's what we have to do in the military. We have to start focusing at the military justice system through the eyes of the survivor. It's painstakingly clear that the conduct of the defendant emphasis did not exist or barely surface in the overturning of the Aviano case. It was like fingernails on a blackboard when I read the 6-page letter the general wrote justifying his decision to erase the conviction. His very first point was that she had turned down multiple offers for a ride home on the night in question. Not relevant, General, not relevant. It seemed completely lost on the general that this had nothing to do with whether or not she had been a victim of sexual assault. The letter not only showed bias, but it also showed that he didn't understand the nature of this crime. I can't tell you how many cases I dealt with where the girlfriend or the wife defended the perpetrator. This is common. This general used the reasoning as part of his justifications, letters that supported the lieutenant colonel, because he said it painted a consistent picture of a person who adored his wife and 9-year-old son. His friends wrote to the general and said he adores his wife and 9-year-old son. That is irrelevant to whether or not he committed sexual assault. This change in mentality is imperative, not only for the sake of the victim, but for the sake of our military strength. If you have an enemy you are fighting on the outside, you should never have to deal with an enemy in your unit. It is a toxic environment. And this is not a problem the military can train its way out of. In early March, I attended one of many briefings I had attended at the Pentagon on this issue, and I was shocked to realize how much of the presentation focused on how we're going to try to keep women safe. And I said, that's not the problem. This isn't about a buddy system. This has nothing to do with the behavior of the victims. The focus has to be on putting these felony assault perpetrators in prison and getting them out of our beloved military. The message in the military has to be clear. If you commit a rape, you will go to jail, not just get transferred. You can't transfer someone out of being a sexual predator. The military investigations need to be done promptly and professionally with victims, not just the perpetrators, wrapped in good information, solid support, and legal advice. We need to focus on whether there is a system where victims have a safe place to go in terms of reporting, whether there is a place for victims to safely receive medical care. Are we taking care of the chain of evidence? Do we have enough trained investigators that are gathering the evidence in the most effective way? Do we have a system that supports prosecutors to go after the assailants? Once the military becomes highly successful and professional about doing these things, we will take a huge step towards addressing this problem. And while many of you have been disappointed, and for good reason, with the way our military has handled this horrific crime, there are some exceptions in the system. I recently had a senior, and when I say senior, I mean really, really, really senior military leader in my office who told me, and I quote, "Senator, I now realize we can't train our way out of this." He repeated back to me, without knowing it, with sincerity, exactly the message that we've been saying. And some prosecutors have advocated for prosecution in very difficult cases. There are many who want to be strong advocates who are working hard to change the system from within. Even the Aviano victim, as I sat with her in my office, said to me she always felt the prosecution was behind her 1,000%. And while the Aviano survivor was supportive of the prosecutor in her case, my visit with her revealed so much more work that needs to be done. Today, I pledge to you that I will continue this work. And with my colleague, Amy Klobuchar, Jean Shaheen, and Kirsten Gillibrand, the four of us will work until we have no breath left in our body to make sure we protect people like you in the coming decades. I am fortunate to have such dedicated colleagues that you are recognizing today. The hearing we held in March, in which the top military leaders briefed us about their efforts to prevent and respond to sexual assault, was historical for several reasons. Not only was it the first time there had been a hearing in the Armed Services Committee focused on the challenges facing the military justice system in handling sexual assault cases, not only for the first time did we have a brave victim that was a male step forward out of the shadows and talk about the victimization of men by sexual assault in the military, but for the first time, the majority of members of the Senate that asked questions that day were women. It is easy to remember a time very recently when there were no women on the Armed Services Committee, and now there are 7 of us on that committee fighting on this issue. This crisis has the attention of both sides of the aisle, so we must grasp this moment to fully examine what's left to do. What additional authorities must be reined in, particularly with commanders? Rather than upending the lives of survivors once an assault is reported, does it make more sense to move defendants, not the perpetrators, out of their units? How can we ensure that contractors, civilian employees, and uniformed military members are all treated equally when it comes being able to report a sexual assault, to be protected by legal advice and medical help, and to be able to file either a public or non-public report? The rules should be the rules no matter who the victim is. Can we make changes to the reporting procedure to help us identify serial offenders? Does it make sense for the clemency phase of the trial to occur prior to an appeals process? And there is no reason evidence that is deemed inadmissible during a trial should ever be allowed to be used by someone who is determining clemency. I find this particularly infuriating. I did not realize at the hearing, and it wasn't until after I visited with the victim that I realized that there had been a rape shield determination in the Aviano case, and the evidence had been excluded. But yet, all of that evidence went to Franklin as he made his decision. Even the evidence that the judge had deemed was inappropriate, inadmissible, and irrelevant. That really makes me mad. Do we need to consider any kind of guidelines for juries in these cases? And while we focus on making these changes, we need to celebrate all of you who have come forward, no matter how your case turns out. We're here to support you. Please keep in mind, one of your most important jobs is to continue to set an example of courage. There are so many that are still quietly suffering. There are so many that are not in this room, but need to be in this room. Until these victims can step out and demand justice, we can never declare victory. This is very simple, but it's hard. We have to support our survivors and put these people in prison. As I told the Aviano victim, who has been through so much and who now is having her case relitigated, as painful as that is, in the court of public opinion, she has done a great service to the national security of this nation. Because of her, major changes have already happened to the rules surrounding criminal trials in the military, and there are more to come. Had she not suffered this travesty, and had she not come forward, how long would it have taken for us to move the needle ahead in such a dramatic fashion? How many more times would a general be able to say, never mind, to a jury's decision? I reminded her, and I want to remind all of you, that what you're doing is noble and strong and right. And even though her case took a terrible turn, and many of your cases may have had similar setbacks, she and you should be very proud. You are patriots of the best kind. Because of you and your bravery, we're going to put the definition of true justice back into the official Uniform Code of Military Justice once and for all. God bless you all, and thank you for having me.